Hi, HR nerds. This is Nicole Dessain. Welcome to Talent Tales, the show where I interview leaders who have brought design thinking to their talent and HR practices. In today's episode, we have a special guest on the show. I am joined by Elles Skony, who is the VP of Talent Management at Centro. Welcome, Elles.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Elles, who are you and what's your story?
So like Nicole said, I'm Elles. Resume-wise, right now I work at Centro. I head up talent management, which means I oversee recruiting and business partners and really get to kind of own and drive the full talent management lifecycle from, the first time someone hears about the company until they, never leave, but if they have to leave, until they leave. The question here that was prepped for was to say something that wasn't just about the resume. So I think for me, from an HR perspective, I am incredibly passionate about making sure that every HR professional is thinking about and getting better at improving the employee experience. So love just these types of things, networking with HR people, especially in the startup mid-sized company world in Chicago. There's a tight group where, we're taking each other's talent, but it's not competitive. And I love that because I think just improving how we do HR to make people's lives better is just so important. So that's a big passion point for mine and why I love this career.
Love that. So tell me a little bit more about that, where you say, we all are in for talent and the right talent, and, there's talent shortages, but we're not competitive about it. Tell me a little bit more about how you do that, because I'm sure a lot of people, even in other cities or across sectors or across workforces, might be interested in learning a little bit more about how to collaborate that way.
Yeah, I think honestly, everyone that I've reached out to in the HR space is normally very open to it. I haven't really come across someone who says, I won't share my best practices with you. Usually everyone, what I found surprising, when I started in this industry, is open to it. So what I actually do with a few other companies, again, in the mid-sized startup space in Chicago, is we quarterly get together and our HR teams just talk about best practices and what we're doing. So we pick a topic. Like last quarter, it was analytics. And we get all of our teams together and we just talk about how our companies do it and what we like about it and the employee experience. And, then at the same time, we laugh about how, someone took one of our engineers the other day, but you can't help the talent war for what it is. So it's really just a place to say, how do we make people's lives better when they spend so much time at work? And HR is such a big part of that. So I've found a lot of people are open to it, which is wonderful.
Love it. So, Elles, what's your creative superpower? People usually like this question.
Yeah. Okay. This is a hard one, but I chose communication. I did a little Post-it. This is my homework. It's an awful drawing. Mm-hmm. My daughter is better at drawing right now than I am. Mm-hmm. It has little bubbles, and then the bubbles are connected. So
that's good.
I have realized how important communication is, specifically to employees. If you're in the HR mind space. So I chose that as my creative superpower because I find that I am always thinking about it. You can come up with the best programs and the best initiatives, but if you can't articulate it well to employees or in an engaging way, it's really not going to be utilized. And so usually what I contribute to most of our communication when it comes to employee programs or just things HR wants to talk about is a good infusion of humor. And my team knows I'm really big on memes. So just really making sure to sit across the table from myself and say, I'm an email skimmer and I know that about myself. And I assume, most managers are, right? So I like to, I usually am found to be helpful for my team in just saying let's just tweak that email and put a smiley face or a meme or make it shorter. And so that's why I put that as my superpower.
That's very cool. So the meme wizard. I love that.
Yeah, love me some memes.
I
Puns.
need to
There are
I need to
usually
come to
puns
you for
in
that.
everything.
I'm not that good at that, so I'll come to you next time when I need a good meme. I think
Yeah,
we could
I
all,
like to make fun of
yeah,
HR in my emails because
yeah.
then people, try to be the cool HR. Yeah.
I love that. And that sort of goes along the lines with the skill really of storytelling, which we use
hmm
in design thinking as a method to convey, key insights and to, get people involved and engaged in what we want to
Yeah,
do. That's actually
absolutely.
a good segue to design thinking. So tell me a little bit more about how you discovered design thinking and how you've applied it at Centro.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think there was a moment where I like read about design thinking and then, it happened. I think the way that design thinking showed up the most overtly for me and for Centro is, we always have collected feedback from employees and changed programs or added or subtracted or whatever it was. But what we were finding is at the beginning of the year or whenever we sat down and looked at our HR programs, there wasn't like a very clear framework for us of when to say yes or no to things, when to know like, yes, that is what the employees need or no, it's not a priority. And so design thinking was helpful in actually creating like a framework for the employee experience. That's how I use it the most. So really sat down and said, okay, at each stage of my employee's experience, what is the feeling that I want to invoke? What's the narrative I want to happen in that stage? And then what's some hard, data or, emotions from employees of how we're doing against that? And then how can we improve it? So we kind of made it into like an employee experience with a SWOT analysis that we do constantly. And that's where it showed up, again, just the most overtly in like pen to paper of how we can use the employee experience for that framework.
Super interesting. So that SWOT analysis, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So the first iteration of it was honestly like I had a big spreadsheet. It had every stage from hire, attract, hire, onboard through to transition or offboard. And it's that full employee life cycle. And then what I did was I got best practices, from an external industry perspective, like what do employees want to feel at that stage? So in the onboarding stage, this is a critical point for employees to understand cultural norms. You want it to be a very positive experience. And then for Centro, I went just a level deeper of like, how do I want Centrons to feel, a little more specifically. And then I went out, I did interviews with stakeholders across the company and I got feedback. And then I kind of evaluated and said, how are we doing against, the ideal state? And from there, it really told us, externally, we're missing a lot of what the best practices look like. Internally, for how we want Centro to look and feel, where are we on that? And then it helped to better articulate for me exactly which programs we're leading to either the areas of opportunity or things we needed to change, or which programs we needed to kind of double down on because that experience was, or that the feelings were coming, from those experiences. So I did a full map out with, strength, weakness of each stage of the employee life cycle. And then a map out of which programs and initiatives need to be aligned to make sure that experience is what it needs to feel like.
And then if I remember correctly from our pre-conversation, and this is kind of timely because it's strategy planning season, I believe you said then you take that and you incorporate that or use that as an input into your annual HR strategy planning, or can you maybe tell us a little bit more about how you then kind of tie the SWOT analysis to strategy planning?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is our annual planning now. So once we have identified, where we're strong or where we are weak in certain areas of the life cycle, we are able to, I'll give an example like attract. Okay, so when you're in the attract phase, you want people to, again, have a positive experience of Centro, but you don't have much control over this. There's not like touch points. It's more just, what does your website look and feel like? what's out there in the media. What does your Glassdoor look like? And a couple of years ago, at the attract stage, our messaging wasn't necessarily consistent with what was happening inside of Centro. Like our employee messaging, our cultural messaging, it was much more about our business in the attract phase. And so that gave us the insight to say, okay, this year we're going to focus on redoing the website for the cultural section, redoing our careers page, and doing videos of employees and getting that out into social media. And so each of those stages has executional items associated with it. And that drives our budgeting, that drives our programs. It really lays the foundation to say, here are our goals for the year and the things that we want to make sure happen. And that's the strategy that we come back to consistently throughout the year.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Just to remind everybody, put your questions in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. So this is really, really cool because I think it's one thing to do design thinking or experiment with it and employee experience maybe, but it's another then to really methodically tie it to your annual strategy planning. And I think that's where some companies still are struggling with how to tie these two things together. So I think this is kind of an interesting model of how you've done this successfully and how you tie all these pieces together and made it part of how HR operates almost, it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure.
But then of course, I'm sure there have been barriers or lessons learned, that you encountered along the way when you started doing this. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think like the biggest barriers are all of that sounds great and you know exactly how you want your employees to feel and you know what your priorities need to be, and then you're hit with the day-to-day. So I think what I've found is we've done a pretty good job of tracking against the employee experience and what we want to do, but when you get to the end of the year, there's things that just didn't happen. And so introducing this in the beginning, let me back up a little. Introducing this in the beginning, it was definitely an education period for the rest of the HR team and also for, the people, the stakeholders that I had the interviews with. That was actually a really helpful way to introduce it because it was organic in nature, where I was just saying like, hey, I just want to get some feedback on the employee experience. And then like, here's what I'm doing with it. So that's how I socialized it. Then it moved into, creating strategies around it. And then the biggest barrier to just continuing to do it is, you have this great plan and then, the sales team decides to reorg or whatever it is, and you deprioritize other things. So the ideal employee experience that we all strive for, things just get in the way, and then you iterate, which is the beauty of, design thinking is you should fail and iterate, but just a prioritization and keeping it really top of mind, as all HR people know, business gets in the way. So continuing to talk about it and bring it back up, I found is really the most important thing for my team. Like I'll bring it up, every quarter with the talent development leadership team, and we'll say like, how are we doing? Like, oh, we totally forgot to do that program or that initiative because X, Y, or Z happened. So keeping it as like a frequent thing to come back to, I've found has actually helped with that barrier of, just the day-to-day getting in the way.
So keeping it top of mind with the HR team, and then also with the leadership or with the business, it sounds like.
Yeah, so the way we approach it with the business is not necessarily as overt as like, here's what we're doing in the HR team in terms of strategy. It's more like we check in twice a year with their talent data. And that talent data includes action plans, and the action plans are things that have come off of our strategy, but we don't say like we're doing design thinking with the employee experience and here's what it is, but all of the things that come from that initial strategy and the way we do employee experience iterations, that all is presented to them in a way of, here's all the programs we're doing for your team, here's how proactive we're being about your talent, and then here's your talent data that we now have to kind of do like another employee experience SWOT analysis on to see how we can improve it for, you know, the people who are leaving in your turnover or whatever it is.
So I find this interesting, the tactic you take to bringing this to the business, because I know some organizations choose to talk about it with the business and tying it to customer experience, so it resonates with the business. And it sounds like the strategy you use, and maybe some others as well, is, you know, we don't want to over buzzword the business with, you know, another HR term or something like that. So we'll just do it, respond to their needs. You know, we are aligned and we know what it's called, but we don't need to, you know, we package it differently. So I find that interesting.
Yeah.
Why have you taken that tact?
Yeah, I mean, the business is our customer, right? And I think we talk about the importance of the employee experience and how that is the priority. And so as we coach the business, we'll say, you know, I'd prefer we not do this because the experience of the employee is X, Y, or Z, right? So we talk about employee experience very organically. It's just a matter of like, they don't necessarily care how we're creating the strategies on the back end. They do care about their people. They care about their talent. And so we speak to them in a way that is applicable for them, but also shows that we are strategically thinking about their talent. But the whole lead up for them of here's how I got to these ideas is just not necessarily, we haven't found it to be a good use of our time with the business, because they disengage more. So really it's just like, hey, trust us, you know, we've built credibility with you. Here's the strategies that we want to walk through, and here's why, but not so much of like, here's how we got to this place.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What's the impact you've noticed after having introduced human-centered design, employee experience to your organization?
Yeah. So on the business side, even though, again, they're not like in the nitty-gritty, our talent data has become better, and that talent data is kicked out with insights on certain pieces of the employee experience. So I'll say, like, you know, for people who are in, you know, 2 to 5 years at Centro or 12 months in their role, here's where we're doing well, here's where we're not doing well. So we do talk about it like that. So that's gotten better, where the business has more insight into specifically how to dig into different audiences of their talent. For the HR team, the biggest impact, which was a lot of the purpose, is, you know, as I'm sure a lot of you know on the phone or on the call, when you grow an HR team, there is, excuse me, there is a natural inclination that happens when you grow, especially quickly, an HR team, where you start to become subsets. You know, you have your benefits team, your recruiting team, your education team, and they don't talk to each other as much as they need to. You know, the silos start to happen. And we found that with fast growth, you bring new people in, they're in their subject matter expertise. But what happens again is, if you focus on the business as your customer, they're not hearing the same thing. You know, they're not seeing the same strategies across the teams. They're having one conversation with, you know, a recruiter, and then a different conversation with a business partner. So a lot of where this stemmed from was actually needing a strategy across every single function of HR to say, our goal as an HR team is that the employees experience this. And it doesn't matter which team you're on, it doesn't matter which role you have, but like if it's onboarding, all 4 of our teams are going to touch the onboarding experience. And so it was a way to get us to break down those silos and to have kind of like the common goals to go after. And that's been incredibly impactful. And we've done some other things, obviously very consciously, to break down the silos with structure and things like that. But I think just the talent management lifecycle, the employee experience, saying we're all responsible and accountable to this experience no matter what team you sit on, has been a big impact of it.
That's really cool. Just want to follow up on operationalizing of this employee experience, and you mentioned onboarding.
Yeah.
Let's pick that as an example, right? So
yeah.
you look at the onboarding experience and you say, you know, talent acquisition is a part of it. You know, the hiring manager is a part of it. Maybe learning and development, depending how you structure it, maybe the HR business partner, whatever, right? So it's usually, I always call onboarding the ugly stepchild in HR because usually there's so many people who have a part in it, but nobody owns it. And so the new hire falls through. You know, it's very common. So I'm just curious to if you can explain how you operationalize the experience across all these silos, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have gotten there to a certain extent, but we actually just started something new this year because of just that. So so if you take onboarding as an example, you know, when we do our SWOT, when we do the SWOT each year and we assess how we're doing, we did find that there were way too many touch points with the new hire from different teams. So you had, you know, recruiting reaching out, then you had the education person reaching out, and then you had the business partner team reaching out once they were employees. And you have the benefits team reaching out. So to, you know, to a new hire, I'm like, I don't know who my HR person is. You know, I don't know who I'm supposed to ask questions to for what. And so we, from a very tactical, like operational perspective, I actually reorganized our HR team to just have talent coordinators who work across all of our teams. They are working on, they're doing recruitment, scheduling, they're doing onboarding with education, they're supporting the business partners with employee relations. And so they work cross-functionally. And that was a very specific output of this exercise of the experience to say, you know, our HR team can't have 4 people reaching out to new hires. And then it actually led us to change how we're structured, which was a cool exercise. And for the ownership piece, that's still there. And so what we started this year, which we haven't started, but we, you know, have them ready to go, is we're actually starting HR task forces, which is a cross-functional teams focused on very specific pieces of the employee experience that are critical. So onboarding, you know, rewards and recognition, intern strategy and programming, all these things where like each of our teams have to be involved and there's no leader. And so we're trying that out this year, which I'm excited for.
Very cool. What's your favorite design thinking resource or hack?
Yeah, so this was a hard one because I don't have like a very obvious place I go for design thinking in particular, but I was thinking about from a hack perspective, like I'm a big Post-it person in meetings, like pretty much in any meeting where I'm trying to get ideas on the table. I throw Post-its into the middle of the table, and then I specifically ask people to like write ideas to a certain question, and then I collect all the Post-its, put them up on the board, and theme them out. And so people feel more comfortable sharing ideas because it's anonymous to a certain extent. And then I get to kind of cut down in efficiency because I see that, 5 ideas just came out of this. And so now we have our answer. So Post-its are a big thing for me when it comes to like, how do we think of new things? What feedback do we have for our programs? And I just say like, hey, strengths, weakness, write 2 Post-its for me about the program that we're doing. And then I put them all up on the board and we kind of just talk about it as a group.
Love it. Love it. Before we jump into audience questions, and we got quite a few for you. My last question is usually I provide you with a quote and let you react to it. Are you ready?
Oh, great. Sure.
Okay. Quote. There is no shortage of remarkable ideas. What's missing is the will to execute them. Unquote. Seth Godin.
Yeah, so good. So good. So I think that's where, there is ideal state and there is real state, and like marrying those and figuring out like, okay, this all would be amazing for our employees, but like, what can we actually do and what's most important? And then holding each other accountable to executing on that. So important. I love that one.
Cool. So let's hit some of the questions. So
great.
Ronaldo is asking, and I know you talked about a little bit how you communicate to leadership about it, but he was wondering, what was the involvement, if any, of line management leadership in the design process? Did you include them? I assume in the SWOT analysis is what he means, or, that whole upfront part. Mm-hmm.
Yep, they're totally critical for the feedback portion. So, I definitely prefer to get feedback from employees than HR sitting in a room saying how we're doing. So line managers and stakeholders in leadership, specifically people that I knew were influential to our culture, who were influential leaders, doesn't have to do with title, but like those people where, if you look at a network map, they have like 1,000 dots around them. I met with those. I try to get those people's perspectives because usually they are very in tune with how employees are feeling.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Erin is asking for some tips around. So she says she struggles a bit with the education piece, mostly about getting her point across in groups in a really effective way to get their buy-in. She's really good at getting input one-on-one, and they get it. But any tips for sort of getting points across in a group setting?
Yeah, is that yes? Any group with the education piece. So I
assume employees. I assume employees and maybe leader groups.
Oh, okay. Internally specific. Got it. Employees.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah. So again, I think a lot of it is around communication. And a lot of my energy with my team is giving feedback on their communication. And like when they're leading specifically groups when they're having discussions with groups of leaders about their talent, I'll go with that example. I do a lot of like, we sit down and talk about how to approach it first. And I do a lot of like, make it simpler, stop talking, like make it really specific. Like don't leave it open for like, okay, well, where did that data come from? Okay, well, like, what do you mean by that? Like really try to hone in on like these leaders are thinking about this right now. They're busy with their day-to-day, right? They love their talent. They want to care for their talent, but they also want to do it quickly. And so a lot of my coaching and feedback and how I personally like tweak myself is how can I say this in a simpler way where you can really try to get your point across, and the business leaves knowing exactly what the point of that meeting was. I've found that really important.
Well, we should all go to Elles for communication advice. Note to self. The AMA HR team has a question around negative experiences that are shared on Glassdoor. So they're saying, an employee with a negative experience is something like 50% more likely to post about their experience on Glassdoor or other outlets than those with a positive experience. Do you actively encourage employees to speak up about their positive experiences? If so, what strategies are you using to encourage them?
Yeah.
And it's still in an authentic way,
And of course, it has to be authentic. Yeah. Yes. So we went through Glassdoor strategy, like revamp, if you want to call it that. About 2 years ago, our rating was going down. We had some really negative things that kind of shook us. And so the biggest strategy that we went with, we actually do not solicit for reviews internally. We tried it like really casually and then it just went badly. So we don't solicit for internal. There are definitely specific strategies like when new hires come on board, say, did you like your new hire orientation? Please post on Glassdoor. That didn't feel right to us. But we did start responding to reviews. I don't know if you do that. And that has actually really helped. Not just with the reviews on Glassdoor did it help, but with our employees, because they're very in tune with our brand. Centrons are very passionate about Centro. And so they would see the Glassdoor reviews and then chatter would happen inside of the company. And so what we decided to do was start responding. And we think about it from both responding to the people who wrote the reviews, who we, of course care about, but also making sure to fit things in there that our internal employees need to know so that we're speaking to them at the same time. And that's helped us tremendously the past year and a half.
1 minute, one last question from Heather. How have you dealt with reactive approaches to industry trends by management? For example, I've heard about this is a great tool, we should pilot it, when it is not aligned to the design plan.
Yeah, I love that. When they're like, this is my friend, and they have this system, and it's the best. Yes, so we, again, that is where like it's been very helpful to anchor ourselves on the strategy that we put in the beginning of the year. Not only does it tie to budget, so we have that excuse, if you will, of like, sorry, we don't have budget, but one of our strategies was employee-facing tools are going to be limited, right? So we are not going to introduce new tools to employees because we're finding through the experience that they don't even know what our HRIS is right now, and that's the focus. So that's an easier response to the business to say, hey, love the tool, like that's awesome and super helpful, but we're actually not in a place where we're going to introduce any more logins to employees or any more softwares to employees, because our focus this year is getting them acquainted with our HRIS, LMS, and ATS, right? And they respond really well to that because there's thought behind it. So that's been helpful.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Alice, for joining us and everybody else as well. It was really super interesting to me. Keep an eye out for the recording, and I hope I see you all at a future Talent Tales webinar.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.